Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second book club by Utah Business. I'm Elle Griffin. I'm the editor of Utah Business, and today we're going to be discussing the book Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And I perfectly picked today's panelists because they are very multifaceted people. We have Curt Roberts, who's Kickstart seed fund partner. Although, did you guys drop the seed fund recently?
We're kind of Kickstart, but we're seed fund also. So whatever you want to use.
Kickstart partner. But Curt also is a collector of rare books, which I find very interesting.
I am. It's true.
Rachel Hofstetter is the CMO of Chatbooks, but prior to her sojourn into the marketing world, she was also an entrepreneur. And before that, she was actually an editor and journalist. So that's very interesting. Welcome. And then I have with us USANA VP of Data Security, Dasha Kadulova, who once trained for the Olympics and still competes in masters events for women's skiing.
Wow.
Wow, you win. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm definitely the generalist.
So interesting people to talk about this book, but I do want to mention to everybody who's on the call, we have the chat open. So if you go to the Zoom webinar chat and make sure that you've selected to all panelists and attendees, when you send your message, then you can chat with all the other guests that are here, introduce yourself, say hi, and you can also ask questions of us if you want us to talk about anything interesting. So go ahead and get the chat going. I do want to kickstart off the call for everyone who read this book. This book is about kind of the antithesis to the whole 10,000 hours, Malcolm Gladwell, outliers kind of premise of you have to be studying something for 10 years full time and then you'll be a master at it. The book is very much like, well, actually, if you just study a bunch of different things and if you're a late starter, that's okay. Like a lot of people have done it that way too. So I wanted to just get your guys' feedback. First of all, what did you think? What were your first impressions reading the book?
So I love this book. I've been an advocate of it for the last year. I think it came out June or May of 2019. And I got it and then I read it and then I kept talking to people about it and I got kind of obnoxious, to be honest. And then I made my husband read it and then he kept talking to people about it and now people on my team read it. So I'm a little obnoxious, so full-fledged, like I love it. And I'm sure there are scientific things that are not correct in it or whatnot, but I think he makes such an interesting point and it validates lots of things. So you always like books that validate the way you look at the world. I'll be totally honest, like drawn to those things as we all are as humans. But I think validates a lot of what we see working these days, right? And 2020 is such a crazy year that almost everything he talks about in a wicked world where things don't go according to plan, that is what we are living in right now. And so it feels even more timely than it did a year ago, right? Like you almost can't imagine a more wicked, in the term of things not going to pattern than there is right now. So I'm really excited we get to talk about it today.
Yeah, I think for me, I usually specialized reading a lot of technical books, right? But when else asked me about this book, I kind of looked up, like, yeah, why not? It's like I haven't really been part of any type of a book club or anything. But actually, after reading the book, it really made me realize why I think the way I think. Because it's like, oh, well, I've never done this. Why not? Let's just go with it, right? And I think it does. It was kind of interesting because, like on I think it was in chapter 2. It was based on the gentleman named Flynn. I can't remember his name, but he was mentioning that a lot of even the best universities are in developing a lot of the critical intelligence in today's modern world, right? How do we give our students and the tools to analyze what's going on around the world today? And also, do we really need to specialize in certain things, or do we really want to become the generalists? And after reading, getting into this chapters, it's like, oh, I started to being more specialized because I was in IT and specialized in networking and those things, and then I got bored, and then I become the generalist, because if I didn't understand the other components of IT, I felt I just didn't know enough to make those solid decisions.
Yeah. So Elle, I have spent my life as a generalist, right? So reading this book was incredibly validating, which shouldn't be a reason why I should like it, but there were a lot of concepts in it that really rang true in terms of my own experience. So I really look forward to talking about those today.
Yeah, I kind of do want to get into your personal stories a little bit, because I know when I first read Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell's book, I was stressed out by it because I was like, oh shoot, I need to like pick something and stick with it. And in my 20s, I definitely experimented, was like a yoga instructor, and then like a food writer, and then marketing and tech world, and like I was a fashion merchandising major. I was like, oh, I'm just trying all the things. And I was like, oh shoot, I gotta pick something. So I think maybe this book is just a sell for people that really relate to it. But I don't know. What are your guys' stories?
Well, I got plenty of those. I want to touch base a little bit on that, because they did talk about a lot of the sports and the athletes. They have Tiger Woods, Federer on the tennis, and then one was doing golfing since he was like one, and then the other one was kind of doing soccer and tennis player. And in my experience, when I moved to Utah, and then the Olympics were going to be awarded in 2002, I just had the idea. It's like, well, why not? I want to be an Olympiad, and I was going to go for that. And since I'm from the Czech Republic, I was actually competing for the Czech Republic, but I put a plan together for 5 years and didn't have that background. I was not the Tiger Woods that I started skiing when I was 2 or 3 years old, right? I didn't put plastic boots on until I came to Utah, really. I was in some leather, cross country skis. So having that mindset and just kind of going for that, I just went with it. And to me, it was I going to win the gold medal? Probably not, but I had a goal to, be in the top 20, having those realistic goals. And unfortunately, I had a torn ligament in my knee like 3 or 4 months before the Olympics, so I didn't get to compete it. But it's the journey. You kind of go through that, and you was like, yeah, I can do it. And I think the book actually talks about it, is that if you want something to accomplish, it's that the stuff you want to do, you will do. So that's, and I had that experience, and even today, that whole skiing experience, I still love doing that, but now I'm a little older, so I get to participate in the Masters circuits. But I was in Italy, in February, and competed in the Masters World Cup in Italy. So I still participate, I still have fun with it. And, I don't think being specialized from a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, I think you can achieve a lot of these goals outside being specialized.
Yeah. So just a few comments. So I worked at Nike for a while, and I was there during the prime time of the period in which we were sponsoring both, Roger Federer and Tiger Woods. Tiger specialized at a super young age. It's fine. It's great. I love the idea that the book, kind of highlighted the fact that Roger experimented for a while. Here's what I think. I think the larger point of the book is less the point of whether you specialize or not. I think the point is that the magic comes at the intersection of disciplines. That even if you specialize, which probably makes sense at some point, and the Federer example I think is a good one, in the sense that he tried a few things and then decided on tennis. It's fine, right? The bigger point in terms of, I think, the way that we make an impact on the world is that when we see a discipline in which we're deep, and we find insights from another discipline that actually can affect the way we're thinking about the problem we're trying to solve, that's where magic happens. And so that's the takeaway I had. And it actually caused me to think back on particularly one experience I had in my career, which exactly fit the framework the author is trying to describe, which, is very validating. Of course. So.
Kurt, I agree with you completely. And I think I would say a corollary to that, something that really struck me is, sorry, were you finished talking?
I'm done. Yeah, I'm done.
Sorry.
Go for it.
Wait a second. Maybe that was not a
no, go Rachel, go.
This idea that you can have specialization, and then how do you expand yourself to, you don't have to have another, work specialty per se, although it's fine if you do, but this idea of hobbies. And he gives the example of the Nobel Prize winners and the people with really big contributions in their field. Turns out that they were really invested in something else outside of work, whether it was playing a musical instrument or art or something like that. Like they were really big on something else. And I took away, my biggest takeaway for me was get a hobby and go deep. Like bring something else to your world that you can then play off of each other, right? I do this for work and I'm specialized over here, but then I do this thing. And as you wrote over here in the chat, it's the intersection that's so important. How do you put more things in your life to have more intersections like that?
Yep. I agree.
I actually I got kind of tired of the book in the middle, and I was like, I don't know.
What?
This is really playing out for me. So I actually went and Googled all the people that he uses in examples, and I kind of was like, okay, Roger Federer started his professional tennis career, chose tennis in 1993, and it was 10 years until he won his first Wimbledon. So
really young.
Yeah.
He's been a generalist, but he still put his 10,000 hours in tennis. And then, it was the same with the girl, what was her name? Frances, who was the CEO of the Girl Scouts until he turned that organization around. Like, sure, she didn't have experience as a CEO and she did a lot of volunteer work, but by the time she was the CEO of the Girl Scouts, she had definitely been working at the Girl Scouts for 10,000 years as like a senior leader role. So like, I definitely, and he lists, Patrick Rothfuss, the author, he bounced around, all these people that bounced around. It's true that they bounced around, and it's true that they took inspiration from other places, but they also eventually or simultaneously were focusing on one thing.
True.
Like
True.
It's sample and do lots of things and specialize in some ways or shapes or forms. Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of both. I'm definitely a little bit of both.
So specialize in something, but allow other.
Yeah, I mean, even in the book, there was the other example was with the Czech athlete that she was a snowboarder, but she ended up winning Olympic gold in Pyeongchang in the Super G, coming from the backfield, and she was stunned, and everybody else was stunned that, wait a minute, how did that happen, right? But she also does a lot of other sports that gives you a little bit more. It kind of gives you the foundation of hand-eye coordination, and she was windsurfing, she was doing this, she was doing that, and she wins 2 Olympic medals in 2 different sports, which nobody has really done.
Yeah. Maybe one of the takeaways is that there's more things are transferable than we think. I think you can think, oh, I am trained for this exact thing and I only lives over here. But like Elle mentioned, I was a magazine editor, but I was not trained to be a magazine editor. I've actually never been trained to do any job I've ever done in any way, shape, or form. And I was an econ major who became magazine editor, who then
yes,
I know all of these things.
Econ, yes.
Econ helps me more today than I ever thought it would, but econ is just thinking strategically, I guess. But I say that because who would have thought so much of what I did in magazines would be transferable to what I do today in marketing? But there's through lines that you can pull through in all different ways, right? Like my through line is probably storytelling. But if I went into another profession, there'd be a different through line pulling things. And so just more is transferable, I think, in a lot of these stories, to your point about the athletes, right? There's more you can connect.
Yeah. Can I use a really crazy example, Elle?
Yeah.
This is going to sound nuts, but it's one that I experienced, and so I think it's maybe relevant to the conversation here. So I became, at an unusually young age, a CEO of a healthcare organization, and it was a company kind of like an IHC. We had hospitals, we had an insurance company, and this was in the early 90s. We were really struggling financially, right? Financials were tough, quality was poor, patient satisfaction was awful. I mean, if you took any metric on which the organization should realistically be judged, it was bad. I went to a presentation by a Boeing executive up in Seattle. It's completely coincidental. And this Boeing executive was talking about how Boeing had decided to implement the Toyota production system at Boeing, meaning that they were going to introduce lean manufacturing in the way they built planes. And I'm sitting there in this presentation, I'm thinking about how this might relate to healthcare. And I saw far more connections than I thought I would, to the point where I flew to Japan. I spent 2 weeks in a seminar in Japan. I literally went to a Hitachi air conditioning manufacturing plant and did a project to take waste out of manufacturing in air conditioning units. And I came back to Oregon and I said, look, we're going to base our entire strategy on lean manufacturing. People thought I'd lost my mind because we're in patient care. You know, I had nurses emailing me, doctors talking to me saying, we are not machines. We're not building something. The patient is not a product, right? There was a person I spoke to who was a consultant to me during that period of time that said, look, you're going to wake up every morning and you're going to look in the mirror and you're going to ask yourself the question, are you insane or is everybody else wrong? And I fundamentally decided that lean manufacturing applied to healthcare. It absolutely did. And I spent the following 3 years focused exclusively on that. And for what it's worth, you know, we were the first healthcare organization in the US to do it. I actually think it's pretty standard today. It's kind of crazy that you would think that building cars would have anything to do with the way you actually take care of patients, but it had an enormous amount to do with how he took care of patients. And had I not gone to that speech and heard that person talk about it and drawn that connection, I would have never reached that conclusion. And it was painful, horribly painful. But I think it's a great example of what the author is talking about here, honestly.
Yeah, is that the piece that the author talks about, like the, kind of like the, how do you, like the integration and whatever training you have from the different areas and then opening up and then, like, I know a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then integrate and just go out and just do what, I think some of the musicians, how they were playing, how they were learning the instruments. You just kind of went and just, not a gut feel, but this is what you believed in, and it's I think you call it your integration or yourself for integration, something like that.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very good. I like your story there.
Thanks.
Are they still using that today?
They are. In fact, I would say what we pioneered is implemented in some fashion in most large integrated health systems in the US today.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy how you can just totally change an industry like that. I was even talking with my husband about it, and he was like, well, yeah, before Lance Armstrong, all the cyclists were like these little tiny, tiny skinny dudes. And then they learned that if they like made their leg muscles super, super huge, then they could go a lot faster. More endurance. Obviously there was doping scandal. But to this day, now cyclists in the Tour de France have these like huge hands. They have like little skinny arms, but they
Yeah.
have huge hands, and they didn't used to.
Yeah. So Lance was a Nike athlete as well, right? And he was the first to focus on cadence. It's kind of interesting. I'm a cyclist as well, so I'm no good at it, but I love it. Lance was the first, I think, in the Tour to decide that something north of 100 cadence made sense. So 105 to 110 cadence. And as soon as you hit that number, you could significantly more efficiently climb hills. And, you know, Lance crushed everybody on the hills. And you could look at Lance and say, look, the dude was doping. Guess what? The top 25 athletes in cycling were doping.
Right.
The guy would still win. Every time he would win, right? And so his innovation was this idea around the fact that you should spin a lot faster because while it might affect your heart rate, your muscles work significantly more efficiently if you did. Yep. Big innovation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's like transferring knowledge to effectively into a new situation or new area and just testing it out, basically. Awesome.
That's such a great point. You can try all these transfers of knowledge and you just test them, and probably most of them don't work, but some of them are like Lance Armstrong's, and
some of them really do. Yeah.
Yeah. After reading the book, was there anything that you were like, oh, maybe I will try that or pick that up? Because I guess I don't need to be a pro at it. I can just do it.
Yeah.
That was just me.
Well, I think it was just, it made me think just to pick things up in general, like try new experiences in general, and know that it might not look like it's directly affecting, say, what you're doing professionally, but it's there in your toolkit eventually. Like, gives you more experiences to draw on. Makes you feel really good about things like travel or, you know, your exercise hobbies, right? Like cycling or trail running or whatever you do. You're like, oh, okay, it's good. It's making me smarter in some way. Basically, it lets your whole life be a professional asset.
Yeah.
So
COVID's probably done that for a lot of people. You keep hearing about the COVID hobbies, quarantine hobbies.
Oh, yeah. Gardening.
Gardening?
Gardening.
Is that your hobby, gardening?
I think, I think I've had that a little bit even before COVID, struck, but now it's, I definitely have a lot more pumpkins and melons and tomatoes and parsleys and dill. I mean, it's just so much fun to grow. And I tried to even pollinate manually with a brush because I was not getting any fruit. So I went and just Googled, like, how do we pollinate, manually some of my pumpkins. So I did that. Before I wouldn't even do that, but it was just an interesting topic. So I just went, it's like, I'm going to go search that information and apply it and see if that works. And I looked today and I had 3 little pumpkins were growing. That's awesome. Which is awesome.
That's so cool.
I just love the idea, Elle, that insights you develop in one domain can be transferable to another. Literally within the last 6 weeks. So there's this process I learned from Toyota, literally car manufacturing, right? That I applied in healthcare, that within the last 6 weeks, I've applied with one of the CEOs that I work with in interior design of homes and in mental health care. And it's worked in the same fashion with the same benefit to the same satisfaction of the CEOs there, to the same organizational impact. And I think that's the value of what the author is trying to describe here, is that there's so much to be learned from, a cross-disciplinary point of view, where there are insights to be drawn from one that can be applied to another. I read a book a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago. It was the biography of Leonardo da Vinci, and and Da Vinci is the most generalist person we could imagine. We think of him as an artist. He actually was someone who understood the human body and its functioning and its biomechanics better than anybody of his time. And it probably took 200 years before anybody really realized the way the heart works, for example, the way he did. He understood physics and astrophysics and fluid dynamics in ways that nobody did. He was the classic generalist. And the interesting thing is that that ended up translating itself into things that we now see that he did. And I think that's just a powerful reinforcement of the fact that the world is an integrated whole. And the extent to which we understand it and the way things work will help us in ways that we can't possibly imagine, that we can't imagine in the day-to-day work that we always do. That's my view.
Question for all of you. One of my biggest questions I read the book, the first 7 or 8 chapters was like, okay, you've got me convinced. I'm in. I agree that this comes at the intersection. And then how do you actually do that? And he gets a little bit into it in the last chapter or two, like more tactical strategies of how do you keep, have some specialties, but then specialization, but bring yourself up.
Yep.
How do you become a T-shaped kind of person? How do you all do that tactically? Like, what does it look like?
What do you think, Dasha?
I don't, I never really thought about it, how that looks like from my perspective. For me, it's really, for me, it's kind of like have to adapt to the situation and then figure out what makes sense to move forward. And sometimes you fail, you just learn from it and you just go to a different direction. You just moving forward. So, for an example, I defected Czechoslovakia back in the 80s, right? So going through different situations that you didn't know what's going to come at you. So I had to adapt to the situation I was in. And in a split second, I had to make a decision to figure something else out, right? And you just kind of go with the flow. So I think it's just really adapting and then figuring out, just making that decision. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't work out. And if it didn't work out, I just had to learn from it and then just keep plowing forward. I don't have anything specific, like, or anything that I would do different. And I take that, whatever I'm doing today, even in the business world, you just keep going forward, and for me, it's very challenging where sometimes people say, oh, this is not possible, or this is too hard or too difficult, or not, it's just that those things just drive me crazy, just because like there's always a way, there's always a different possibility. So for me, it's just moving that forward and just learn from the mistakes. And I kind of like, if you fall, you pick up yourself, and there he goes.
Yeah.
I think honestly, that's one of the reasons why I love being a writer so much, is because every one of my stories that I'm working on is in an entirely different industry. So, for the few months that I was writing an article about blue collar work, I was in steel mills and refineries and putting on the jumpsuit at Chevron and like learning all about it and interviewing everybody at those companies, learning what it's like. And then, in the next instance, I'm talking with a guy about AI technology that could totally change the world. And I'm doing the alpha program on my computer and doing the simulations and learning all about it. And then I get to write about that. And I've had some job offers where people say, hey, will you come write here or will you come write there? And I'll just be like, no, because I want to continue to write about different things every time. And I don't want to like be boxed into one particular industry or brand. And I like being able to fully immerse myself in a bunch of different topics while it's like still making me a better writer, which is like for discipline.
Yeah.
Writing's awesome for that. It's a really
I need to do more of that.
Rachel, it's hard to respond to your question from my perspective because I'm not T-shaped. I know the author kind of advocated for that you be super deep in one area and then kind of light in others. That's not been my history. And so I can't speak from that perspective. I would say, as someone who's kind of gone, I'm probably more of a comb, various tines at different levels. But one of the things I find is that just being somewhat intellectually curious about various disciplines makes an enormous difference. I write a summary in January of every year of the books I've read in the prior year. And one of the things that's kind of fun about doing that is I look back at what I read and I think, gosh, I'm all over the map. I read about brain science. I read about history. I read about biology. I read about all kinds of weird crap. But one of the benefits of doing that is that inevitably I will find some insight from a number of these things that makes a difference in what I do every day. And in the job I have, I'm in any given day, consumer products and healthcare and technology and all kinds of stuff. And I actually find 80% of what I read is shockingly relevant to what I do. And it's solely driven on what's interesting, right? I don't guide it that way. I just find those insights as I go.
Books are such a great way to get to dive into things, right? Especially a well-written book, you dive into a whole area and all of a sudden you're like a mini expert for a while, right?
No, far from that in my case, but yes.
Or you realize more, you realize what you don't know. There's so much you don't know. Maybe it's the other way of looking at it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I like, Curt, how you say, it's the curiosity, like you go and just learn about other things. And I think that was also written in the book. It was the Fermi thinking, right? When he was mentioning, I think it was in chapter 2, and how do you break down a problem? And it's, some people just give up on the problem, they kind of look at it and they just move on. But like the Fermi thinking, I ended up actually, it was very fascinating to me. So what I ended up doing, actually, I took the book down and started researching Fermi thinking and spent probably too many hours digging into it, right? And it's like, why am I even interested in that? But there was something about it that, how do you break, how do you break some of these, some of these problems down? And we already do that, right? When you're in IT or whatever, you break those things down. You don't know why you're doing it. You just do that. And I spent like 3 or 4 hours actually reading about that, and it's so super fascinating. And I want to actually learn more about it. I was even Googling if there's an online class on it. So, I think curiosity is definitely something I think that's important. As the book mentioned, and it's part of the whole developing that critical intelligence, right? And think out of the box.
Yep.
That was one of my, I think, tactically implementing it. Probably my favorite part of the book was at some point, some guy wrote a anti-graduation speech. Like, he's like, instead of I know all the graduation speeches are like, just follow your dream. And he's like, but that's ridiculous. And like, you shouldn't pick what your dream is in where you want to be in 20 years and then decide your path from there. Like, because how could you possibly even know? And that that dream, there might be a totally new dream you can't even think about now then. So he's like, you're better off just choosing, rather than having one long-term goal that you're striving towards, having a bunch of just short-term goals. What is most interesting to me right now?
Yeah. I love the idea that a career is a portfolio. I think that makes a ton of sense. Here's what I do believe. If you make a choice to go into something, you need to be all in, right? Dabbling doesn't make sense. It makes sense to build a portfolio of experiences over time. But what doesn't make sense at all is to take a job, say, I'm going to do this for 2 years, and keep a bunch of hobbies on the side, right? I've worked with people who think that way. And I think, unfortunately, what it leads to is a sense that you don't really care about what you're doing in the moment, right? And I like the idea that you go all in on something for a period of time. And even if you decide later to change your mind, that's totally fine. But you've given everything you have to what you're doing at that point. And those skills and what you learn will probably to some degree translate to whatever comes next.
Yep, I totally agree with that. I'll give you an example. You were talking about the lean manufacturing. I worked for GE Medical Systems for 15 years and did all my Six Sigma training. And
yes,
you know, oh yeah, and I had to take. I was like, who uses this stuff? Well, it's like, why do I have to take my statistics book out of the garage book, you know, in my box we had to actually go through the certification. So. Interestingly, you know, 15 years later, I still use a lot of the Six Sigma tools.
That's cool.
Even in IT, it's you know, if I'm making a decision to pick a product or hiring a staff or whatever it is, a lot of the tools and a lot of the experience, it's like, yeah, we were in manufacturing. I was not in the manufacturing component, but that experience and understanding how I can utilize those tools in those other areas, I still use them today. And it's been really awesome because it's data, those are data points. And when I need to present some data, it's like, here's my Pareto chart, what my Six Sigma tool, you know, spit out. And, you know, and people love it. And some people love it. And it's easy to use. And I'll tell you, that was first I was really like, why do I have to use this? This is just so much work. And when I really got into it and I use it even today, and it's just been awesome to just go from that one area and then you can transfer it into a different area and still utilize it, you know?
I have to say, I don't know that I agree with the all-in for a period. That is just like settling with me weird.
I wonder if, okay, so when I heard Curt say it, I think what I was thinking in my head is, I think you can be, you know, one thing all in at work and one thing also all in on the side. So I don't think it's that you can't have any hobbies. At least this would be my take on your thing, Curt. Like, you can be all in on one project at work for 5 years and all in on like trail racing or something too.
Yeah.
So it's, I think but also I think one of the cool things about being all in is it's kind of like learning to learn. Right? Like that's one of the skills you can have, and you can learn to be all in, you can learn to go deep. And so it's like, can you go deep in one area? That makes it easier to go deep in another area later, right? Like going deep is kind of hard. He has a phrase for it. Oh my gosh, what does he call it? Desirable difficulty.
Yeah.
But that idea of going all in is kind of hard sometimes too. And so maybe that's one of the things you get out of it is.
Yeah, that's right. I think maybe what I'm trying to reflect on is the experience with a person I worked with here at Kickstart who had so many hobbies on the side. And this was a person who was very intellectually curious. I appreciate that 100%, but had so many hobbies on the side that it actually ended up affecting this person's performance on the main job. And you know, that's a problem, honestly, right? If you can't do the main job incredibly well, then whatever you learn on the side that might apply to the main job might not be nearly as valuable because your value in the main job is discounted in some way, right? So it's a balance that you have to strike that's very, very careful. But you know, having done dramatically different things over the course of my own career, I guess what I've learned is, you know, once you make a choice, you have to be all in. If you're going to be, if you're going to be effective, you have to be all in. And you can do this 10% stuff on the side, but the 10% stuff darn well better be stuff that somehow, besides family and exercise and, you know, general learning, it better be stuff that has some ability to contribute. Otherwise, you're not going to be nearly as effective in the job you have and that you're being paid for, right? I guess that's the sense that I have.
I guess I agree that you should do a really good job at your job and really give it your best because you want to, you know, put on a good performance, you want to do a good job, you want to have accomplished something, to achieve something. But I guess it's the words all in makes it sound like it's coming at a sacrifice to other things. And my husband and I were just watching that, The Last Dance.
Oh yeah, the Michael Jordan. Yeah.
So we finished it last weekend, and we were talking about it. And when you watch the documentary, you're like, oh, cool! Like Michael Jordan really gave that his all, and it worked. He was like the best of the best and the best. And then like afterwards, I went into this like huge like internet spiral where I was like, everything about Michael Jordan, tell me everything. And then when I was doing all my personal research, I was like, okay, but he actually kind of like sucked to his family, and he sucked to the people around him, and like he wasn't great with the public either. And like now you see these more modern heroes, like you have a LeBron James who is very good at basketball, but also I think like, you know, you watch his show The Shop on HBO, and he's like really trying to make a difference socially and like impact personally, and in his personal life is very important, and like being a family man is like very important to him. And like he's still very good at basketball, but he's like not doing it at you know, forsaking all other things. He sees his role as a role model and being good at something that he needs to do good with that.
Yeah.
And I think that's like better.
Here's how I would respond to that, Elle. It's not so much Jordan versus LeBron. The point of this particular book, I think, is not one of personal balance, family versus contribution versus profession. I think it's more that the point is there are things you can learn from other disciplines that might make you better at the day job you actually are being paid for, right? And I don't know that if you're, you know, a basketball player, that you're going to learn something from, you know, biology, right? Forget that, right? I just don't know that that translates. I think the point of the author is more that if you're someone who is versatile and you're curious and you learn, what you might find is that the things you learn in a discipline other than the thing you do that you're paid for might actually translate and make your job more effective. It's not one of balance, right? I don't think the author is advocating that you have to dedicate 80 hours of your life every week to your job. That's not, I don't think that's the point. That's my view. For what that's worth.
That makes more sense. When you said all in, I'm imagining like Elon Musk at work, you know?
No, forget Elon Musk. But he's an interesting example of someone, honestly, that has been able to take a general level of curiosity intellectually and translate it into the ability to, you know, to engineer rockets and build cars. That's kind of insane, right?
Yeah.
It's really insane.
A good use case.
He's a unicorn, and most of us shouldn't aspire to that. But it does demonstrate, I think, in a general sense, the ability to learn from multiple disciplines and apply those in a way in which you can make a difference in the world.
Yeah. Okay, I see your point there. I do want to we got some questions in the chat. I think we kind of answered some of them, so message me if you feel like your question wasn't answered. But we did get one, how does technology support or facilitate being a generalist, which I think is interesting.
I would just say, I heard Dasha say, you know, 2 or 3 times she Googled something. And isn't that incredible that we can just Google something to begin to learn and expand our generalist tendencies? It's so right at our fingertips these days.
Yeah. You know, before when I was learning the English language, and then I was obviously in the computer science program, and then I didn't have the internet and to Google stuff. I had to go to the library. I had to go check out a book. I had to figure out the catalog, and there was a lot of time consumption, right, to do that. And now it's just so much, it's at your fingertips, right? And there's a lot of online learning, like MIT has a free online learning classes. You can go to Stanford and take free online classes, whatever there is, and whatever your curiosity or your passion is, you can take that if it's on your time and learn on your, on whatever time you have. And I think that's also I feel sometimes that's a problem too, because like, especially for me, because there's so much available education online that sometimes you spend a lot of extra, I could spend 5-6 hours a day at night just Googling and learning about something, right?
Yep.
It's like, okay, now I need to actually go to my hobby,
Yep.
you know, do something different than doing all the learning. But it's kind of that balance. You have to figure out, you know, what works, I guess, best for that individual.
Yep. You know, I would say that what tech does is, for me at least, it sparks an initial curiosity. What I see online or what I might read in a post of some kind starts my thinking on a topic. It never finishes it, right? The finishing happens with deciding to go deep. And usually for me, that means reading a book. And reading a book means hours and hours of time commitment. And so here's, you know, what I think online does is it gives us such a broad exposure to insights that it can give you a spark of something that you might want to dive deeper on. But if you're going to dive deeper, you probably won't find it online. You'll probably have to invest the time to really go deep in a way that you're not going to find on Wikipedia or through some post. That's my sense. It will start you, but the finishing will happen offline.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
I will say, as a journalist, that's like spot on. Like, obviously, if I'm going to regurgitate in a story a bunch of things I learned on the internet, then it's not a good story because it's already.
Yeah, exactly.
At the same time, I don't have to go down to the city recorder's office to get like information about business that were open. Like, you know, I can find all of the information I need online to get to the point where I need to, like, okay, these are the people I need to talk to. These are the things I need to investigate. These are the things I need to learn more about. Like, you can definitely, I was watching a movie recently where this guy was literally like going through these huge tomes trying to like find this one date that this one murder happened in. And I was like, well, I could Google that. Like, I would get to this story so much faster than this investigator did today. So I think that the initial access to information is huge. It's awesome.
Yep.
Like all things, right? What you put into it is what you get out of it. So it's kind of investing time, whether it's in a book or an online course, which are amazing. And it mirrors the time that put into creating the thing. It's like if the person, like our book, right? You know, he put a ton of time into creating this thing. And so then when you invest the time to read it, you get a ton out of it. Whereas, you know, there's articles up online that take 5 minutes to write. And I mean that in a nice way. Like, it's great. Somebody can write in 5 minutes, but you kind of want to mirror what the person put into it. Usually that's offline more.
Totally. We do have a few comments. Yeah, let's see. There was a book recommendation. Oh, I lost it now. Did you guys see it?
I saved
couple.
up all the book recommendations.
Oh, The Medici Effect was another good book recommendation. Franz Johansson.
The Medici Effect?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read it.
100-Year Life.
Yep.
I want to read the Medici Effect. That just sounds very fascinating.
Not that one either. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. we have 10 minutes left, and I want to talk about education because we all kind of know this for ourselves now, but there was a whole section in the book about college education and how kids are being educated and like what is the right method. And I thought it was interesting how, you know, he says, okay, if right now 80% of us wind up working in a field that is not related to our college major,
Yep.
Is there any purpose in having a major at all? Perhaps we'd be better off taking like endless classes that just interest us and one day they inform our career. Or on the contrary, perhaps we should explore endless opportunities before we go to college and then only enroll once we've discovered like a field of study. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that stat was a mic drop moment, right? Where you go, wow. And then I felt really good because I was like, great, I'm not the only one.
Yeah, like what's the right way? If that's the case, is that good or is that bad?
Well, I think you want to figure out what helps you learn to think critically, right? Because that seemed to be the nut to take away.
Yes.
How do you think critically? And is that lots of classes across different things, or is it going deep? And it's probably both, right? Like, I feel like the answer of this book on lots of things is both. Like, you want to go deep enough in some areas that you learn to think really deep in those ways, and probably exposure to other things is good. But it's all on the key of learning to think critically. Like, that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they mentioned in that book, is that they're not developing that critical intelligence in schools today, right? They're not giving the students the right tools to do that. And they mentioned some of the schools and some of the teachers, and how teachers are actually teaching critical thinking and how they're breaking down some of the problems. And there was a lot of really good examples. Instead of like a math problem, that was more of like a story problem, and that the teacher made the kids think about how do you break it down in the different levels and multiple different ways, to let them actually experiment the critical thinking. Not just, here's a problem, this is how you do it, so next time you see it on a math test, this is exactly how you break it down. They were bouncing ideas how to do it, but they were also saying that they don't do that anymore in classroom, right? How do you teach that? And an example, I had an internship. I hired a person that's in the computer science program at the University of Utah, but it's very challenging for a lot of the interns to get a job, because a lot of the companies that are looking in the technology, they're looking into, you have these certain language like PHP or maybe Java or maybe HTML to build just the basic website. So you can grab any intern and start building a website. But if you're in a program in the university, they'll just teach you all these programming languages that nobody uses anymore in the real world, right? So if you wanted to go get an internship, well, I know this language, but nobody really uses it. So how do you get an internship, right? So what do you do, and how do you prepare yourself to get, you have all these great education, you pay a lot of money for that, but when you get out, you don't really have that expertise of what companies are really looking for. So I think that's a struggle today, I think, at least in the IT world.
Yeah. So, I didn't know until today's call that Rachel was an econ major. I was an econ major. So Rachel was an econ major and she's in marketing, right? I was an econ major and I've been in anything but econ. So it's kind of interesting that what I think that degree did for me, and I would be interested to hear Rachel's point of view on it, but what that degree did for me was it taught me how to think. Mm-hmm. That's it, right? It between econ and math, it taught me to think logically and to ask questions when I heard a point of view that might seem authoritative, but that easily could be wrong and biased. And there's something about that experience in college that I think, as long as you get that, it doesn't really matter what your major is. That if you're taught to think critically and to ask questions and to not necessarily trust the authority figure that you think is telling you what you believe should be true, that is a skill set you can learn in that environment that can be applicable no matter what career you choose in your life. And it can also be applicable even if you change careers in a very dramatic way over the course of your professional life. That's my view.
Yeah.
In that
great major. Oh, I was gonna say, I think econ is a great major for that. Yeah. You'd ask why a lot. Why do people behave how they do? Why do systems behave how they do? Why does anything behave, right? And then that's how you start to make things happen.
Yeah.
Answer the question why.
And, there was I can't find my notes on it, but speaking of econ, there was a chapter that talks about some of the research from some of the psychologists that they did, and they picked Harvard and some of the Ivy League schools, and they tested some of the critical thinking, and the people that were actually in econ scored a lot higher than the people that specialize in certain subject. So their critical thinking was a lot higher if they took majoring in econ. I was trying to find it in the book, but it was really interesting that it actually said that. So there you go, Curt and Rachel. That's why that's why you have awesome critical thinking. econ.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to do more research on that one.
Well,
That's what I'll be studying tonight.
yeah. Well, Ellen, I know we're near time, but one of the main takeaways or questions I had from the book was education, even at an earlier level. I have 2 young kids, and as I read the book, I was like, how on earth do I make sure that they get this kind of hard learning, right? That actually helps you learn, even if it's hard in the moment, right? How do you not just kind of go through and be like, check, 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 I learned this stuff. So that was a fascinating part for me, and I don't know how many answers I have. Big important part of that learning, like how do you help your kids learn the hard way as opposed to the easy way?
That's a good question.
Out there. I have no idea. I'm gonna try, guys.
But I'll tell you one thing is, you know, growing up in Eastern Europe, education was one of those things that was very strict, and we didn't have a choice to, like in schools in the US, you have a choice to, oh, you can choose this and you can choose that. And in Europe, it was like, you're taking this. So I was taking chemistry, physics, and calculus in 7th grade. And I didn't have a choice not to take it. It was, you take it. And if you fail it, you don't repeat the class. You repeat the whole year. So nobody really failed, right? So it was very strict and very rigorous. And you basically, they were giving you all the information, right? You had second language, you had math, you had sciences. And that was very, the science classes is very embedded into your head when you were small, and some of the critical thinking and mathematics. And I didn't have a choice. I had to take it. So I didn't, you know, I couldn't like say, no, I'm not going to go do that. I had to go do that because I didn't want to go back to and repeat a fifth grade.
Yeah.
The 6th grade, you know.
Maybe that's where the hobbies come in then when you're in school. It's like, okay, you're in school learning the things you need to learn, but maybe, you know, Dasha, you were like, okay, well, I'm also going to train for the Olympics while I'm learning all these intense science things. You know?
Yeah, and science was always, you know, it's been interesting topics, and I did learn. Outside, I was interested in seismology and volcanoes and earthquakes, and it's still a very fascinating subject, and I still read about it. And it's not my major, but I will always go at the University of Utah and read about the science stuff, right? And because it's really more of a hobby type. Like, I know it's not really helping me in my job, but it's just something that I like to read about it. I start reading a little bit about thermodynamics, right? It's learning is never ending. I think, and I coach little kids, you know, ski racing, and, you know, they're 12, 13 years old, and it's like, always push the education. It's like, yeah, skiing is important, but so is, you know, knowledge. You have to keep learning to get you to the next level.
Yeah. So Rachel, to your question, one of the things we used to do with our kids, so I'm probably the oldest person on the call, sorry. My youngest is 24. I have 3 kids. One thing we used to do when our kids were young is we took them on walks several times a week. And in the walks, what we would do is we would always have something we would talk about. So we would look at houses and we would say, okay, this house has paneling. This house has stucco. This house has brick. Why do you think they chose that? And we would make them think about it, right? Or we, you know, on the trail, we'd say, you know, this trail is bark mulch, or this trail is paved. What are the advantages of one versus the other? So we would ask the kids to kind of think about what they were experiencing. And, you know, I don't know that it was magical in any particular way, but at least it caused the kids to think about what otherwise would be a completely routine experience. It was just going for a walk, right? And so the beauty of that is I think they learned some things along the way, and hopefully what it did was also create some curiosity in them that caused them to learn patterns and thought processes that would help them in the way the author describes here.
Yeah,
That's really
good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Right.
Okay, well, that was a good book club. Thank you guys for joining me. Just for everyone who's on the call, I want to let you know that we're doing this every month. So our book for August, we will be talking with some of Utah's AI experts about the book AI Superpowers, China, Silicon Valley, and the New World Order. So you can /. That's where you'll be able to register. All right, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next month.
All
Thanks,
right.
Elle.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.